On this 17th day of September 2011, the Franklin D. Roosevelt Medal of Freedom of Worship is now awarded to the Reverend Barry W. Lynn.
As an ordained minister in the United Church of Christ, author and accomplished attorney, you have become one of the most significant advocates for the separation of church and state in the nation. Born in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, and raised in the Steel community of Bethlehem, you graduated from Dickinson College in 1970. Your career then was shaped by two passionate callings: your faith, which would lead you to earn a degree in theology from Boston University in 1973, and the law, which would take you to Georgetown School of Law, where you earned your Juris Doctorate in 1978. After ordination, you began your professional career working at the National Office of the United Church of Christ in Washington, while simultaneously pursuing your law degree at night. During these days, and like many of your generation who were troubled by America's pursuit of the Vietnam War, you also became interested in the issue of freedom of conscience, and in the early 1980s worked to secure amnesty for the thousands of young men who, out of deep conviction, chose self-exile in protest over America's involvement in that conflict. From there, you went on to become legislative counsel for the Washington office of the American Civil Liberties Union, where between 1984 and 1991, you frequently worked on church-state issues. By this point, the question of religion and politics was becoming more and more of a national issue. And in 1992, one of the most respected institutions in the country dealing with this question, Americans United for the Separation of Church and State, asked you to take over their organization as executive director. Dedicated to the idea that preserving the constitutional principle of church-state separation was the only way to ensure religious freedom for all Americans, the AU could hardly have found a more worthy leader. Since that fateful day, you have worked tirelessly to preserve this most basic and important principle, arguing that state-endorsed prayer has no place in our nation's public schools, insisting that tax-exempt churches and religious organizations cannot endorse specific political candidates, whether they be on the right or the left, reminding us time and time again that all religious groups, as well as non-believers, must be treated equally under the law. Nowhere was this fundamental principle put to a sterner test than in the recent dispute about the right of Muslim groups to build a community center in Lower Manhattan. Here you have clearly stated that, like any other religious organization, the community center's sponsors have the right to build the center wherever they see fit, while at the same time insisting that a proposal by the then governor of New York to resolve the controversy by offering state-owned land to build the facility elsewhere was equally inappropriate, stating that, in America, government does not subsidize religion or give religious groups preferential treatment. For nearly 20 years, you have led the AU's efforts to protect and preserve one of the most important doctrines of American liberty, the separation of church and state. In doing so, you have helped enhance the freedom of each and every one of us to worship God in our own way. And for this, we thank you. Reverend Lynn.
Thank you very much for those very gracious words, and of course for this incredible honor that's been bestowed on me. The freedom of religion promoted by the idea of a separation between church and state is always a fragile commodity, even more so at a time when at least 3 candidates from one major political party each claim that God has chosen them to be the next president. I know what this means. At least 2 are wrong. I'm guessing 3. The founder of Americans United for Separation of Church and State was a man named Glenn Archer, a law school dean from Kansas, who gave up his promising political career there to spend the rest of his life in the pursuit of the cause of real religious freedom, concerned about undue religious influences in the public schools, efforts to subsidize private religious education with tax dollars, and censorship based on theological critiques. He became friends with Eleanor Roosevelt, who had written both in her newspaper column and in the pages of Ladies' Home Journal, both that public schools should not promote religion, and that when she sent her own children to private schools, she, quote, never thought about asking the government to pay their tuition. Prophetically, Mrs. Roosevelt once told Glenn Archer the battle for church-state separation may have to be fought all over again, and indeed it has in every generation. Meanwhile, President Roosevelt articulated as early as 1937 a proactive understanding and interpretation of religious tolerance. He did not view it as a gift of the powerful to the powerless, but as a core attribute of every man and woman in the world. He said, the lesson of religious toleration, a toleration which recognizes complete liberty of human thought, liberty of conscience, is one which by precept and example must be inculcated in the hearts and minds of all Americans if the institutions of our democracy are to be nurtured and perpetuated. The Roosevelts would, I suspect, be profoundly disappointed today. The political process itself is being tainted by the corrosive effects of some form of religion and what they are doing to some of the great public institutions of our country. The judiciary, the schools, the social service net, all polluted by a kind of religion which claims to know all things and whose only complaint is that it does not run all things. We're entering a campaign season where candidates routinely go to gatherings in Iowa where preachers quiz them on their personal piety as well as their political philosophy. It violates the very core spirit of the initial constitutional provision declaring its abhorrence of religious tests for public office. Every issue, from reproductive choice to the national debt, has advocates seeking proof texts from the Christian Bible instead of using critical thinking, sound analysis of data, and the commonly shared values of our Constitution. Judges are being removed from office for making unpopular decisions on social issues. The Tea Party has discovered a new Bill of Rights, apparently in its sock drawer, that preserves corporate power and displaces the personal rights of the very individuals who are America. Thank you. Our public schools face a double assault. First, to force religious indoctrination into textbooks of science, of biology, of history, and then to treat those institutions as mission fields for outside groups to subject a captive audience to proselytation and evangelization. If they are not transformed in that way, then advocates seek tuition tax credits or school vouchers to effectively force all taxpayers to subsidize religious doctrine taught in those private schools. The ultimate goal, expressed by my oft-times debate opponent, the late Dr. Jerry Falwell, to seek the end of all public education in America. In the social service arena, President Roosevelt in June of 1941 signed the first executive order barring discrimination in employment by government contractors and grantees based on race, on creed, on color, or national origin. Regrettably, the Bush administration altered that policy to permit religious charities that are the recipients of government funding for purportedly secular activities to continue to discriminate in hiring, giving preferences to special favors to fellow believers, barring jobs to persons of other viewpoints. This scandalous practice, unfortunately, continues into the current administration. Groups justify their hiring bias in so many ways. They say we feel more comfortable working with people like us. In the case of the group World Vision, the recipient of 300 million American tax dollars just last year, it hires only Trinitarian Christians, even in predominantly Muslim and Hindu countries. When asked about this, one of its top officials said, "Well, when you tell the applicants in advance of your religious hiring practice, it's not really discrimination." Wait a minute. Ms. Parks, we told you before you got the ticket where you'd have to sit on the bus. We're not discriminating against you. You know, we have heard all this nonsense before. I want all of us to be free of the fear that some politician claiming to hear the voice of God will seek to impose her or his will on all of us, depriving the rest of Americans from exercising their own spiritual beliefs or their powers of reason. But for that freedom to be viable for all of the 2,000 religious groups in this country and the 20 million humanists and freethinkers, all of us need to work to preserve it. This is not a freedom that is built by Supreme Court decisions or acts of legislatures. It is ultimately kept alive when, in the words of Judge Learned Hand, it lies in the hearts of men and women. When it dies there, it is gone forever. Thank you again for this tremendous honor.